Welcome to the UST Education recorded webinar series. This session is powered by US Transactions. UST is a boutique payment processing firm providing you with personalized service. We offer agnostic, best fit technology solutions for associations, nonprofits, and enterprise clients.
Talking about 5 secrets to make your AMS search easier, faster, and stress-free, but you're actually going to get more like 10 because Dave and I are both sharing our best tips in different areas of the selection process. So you get 5 tips and 5 bonus tips. So Dave, if you want to introduce yourself.
So I'm Dave Schulman. I am the founder of Associations Rewired and Beacon Tech Research. I've spent 25 years in association tech, and here's what I know. Most organizations struggle with tech decisions they shouldn't have to face alone. The biggest issue is associations don't know what they don't know. They know what works for and what doesn't work with the tech that they have, but they don't know the world of the possible. And that's what I continuously find with new clients. So it's really good to expand your horizons, and we're going to do that here. So thank you for being here. I founded Associations Rewired 15 years ago to cut through the complexity using real-world experience, and now that's enhanced by AI. Our approach: larger associations need to build out enterprise solutions. Smaller ones need to make smart purchases. That's why we created Beacon Tech Research for smaller associations who want guidance without the enterprise costs. And when I'm not doing solving technology problems, I teach sailing with the same principle. You can't control the wind, but you can adjust your sails. Vanessa?
Thanks, Dave. I'm Vanessa Dennison. I founded Dennison and Associates, a consulting firm that has helped organizations select software for 10 years now. And I also am a co-founder of Beacon Tech Research with Dave and another partner, looking to make the selection process more accessible, faster, simpler, especially for small and mid-sized organizations. We're looking to bring our expertise to the market in a new way, in a simpler, faster, easier way, but that's still tailored to our expertise about the vendors and the market and to your requirements in each organization, what makes you unique, and help you find the best vendors for those needs. So these were the learning objectives, to create and prioritize some critical requirements, how to involve the right staff in the right way. We're going to talk about how to find the right vendors for your needs, and how to get the most out of your demos, and then how to manage a fair evaluation process to get you to consensus. So these are really all the stages of the selection process. We're going to talk about different tips and tricks in each one of these stages. So what stage are you in? This is a chat question, one of those engagement questions that Nicole mentioned. What stage are you in with your selection right now, if any? And what is your biggest concern around selections? If you want to throw those in the chat, that'd be great.
While we're waiting on that, if I might just comment, Vanessa, I was talking to a client this morning who went to AMS Fest, and she was like completely confused because she said they don't give you any guidance on what AMS fits in what market. You don't know whether you're looking at something that costs $200,000 or more or $10,000. And so I just throw that in. We're gonna solve that for you today.
Are we seeing stuff in the chat yet? I'm sort of relying on you guys to look at that.
Of course you are. Let's see. We got just signed a new AMS, just identified a need. Biggest concern is getting staff buy-in and finding the right solution.
Mm-hmm.
Just starting the process. From Jim, Juliana, we just signed with the new AMS and are in the development stage, scheduled to launch later this year. And Kevin says, just starting. Concern as to the transition time, what the transition time is and the cost. So let's dive in.
All right. So first step is engaging staff, and I did hear one of those in the chat. So Dave, if you want to start out.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that was me. Sorry. So my tip is to include everyone. For those of you who are worried about getting buy-in, I heard that in the chat. You want to include as many people as possible in the initial discovery for your selection, for your requirements. And that not only gives you a deep understanding of the requirements from all the different levels of your organization, but it also starts to build buy-in. People are going to accept what they've been part of finding or participating in. And if you try and do more of a top-down selection where you maybe only involve IT or management staff, you don't get that buy-in, and people will start torpedoing your selection before you even start. You don't have to use all their input, and you may have people where you think they're not going to have very useful input, but just having the conversation is a really big outreach effort to start building that buy-in and moving in the change management direction. So that's my tip.
And I'll add to that what you really want to do is have your staff say, look at what I helped select or what I helped build, not look at what management shoved down our throats. So the
Yes.
more you can include, the easier it's going to be for you. So defining your team, you should have clearly defined roles, and you will have a core team of 3, 4, or 5 people, depending upon the size of your organization. It could be as few as 2, but don't make it 1. You're going to be in trouble. And I would also recommend that you start with a survey of your entire staff and ask them, what do they like? Just a simple, short, few questions. What do you like most about the current system? What do you like least about it? And here's the winner for it. If you could have 1 to 3 features in the new system, what would those be? And please state, be specific. Not being our old system is not a helpful feature of the new system. And keep track of those and do your best to see that each individual gets 1 or at least 1 of the things that they really wanted. You'll be surprised. It's going to be a lot easier than you think, and just get your staff, when they fill out the questionnaire, to be realistic. This is how you go about creating evangelists. You give everybody a win in the process. So for the roles, you've got business owner. I recommend, if you can, to get somebody from your executive committee or from your board to participate. I know that sends shivers down your spine, but the board is going to be the most likely one to toss a hand grenade when it's all over if they weren't engaged from the get-go. So if not that, you can always include either an executive director or more likely a COO or CFO, but somebody at the executive level in the organization should be the business owner. They're the ones ensuring that the project is well aligned with the business goals and strategy. The next is the project owner, and it's likely you because you're on this call, but they should be somebody who is somewhat tech savvy or more tech savvy than the others. And be in charge for ensuring that the project is running on time, on budget, and everybody's doing the work that they need to do. And then last, but certainly not least, are your stakeholders. You want to try and engage as many people as possible, and be cautious. A lot of senior executives will want to play that role, but they're not where the rubber meets the road. They are not the ones who experience the interaction with the AMS as much as your staff people do. So you can include them, but make sure you have your frontline people on this team of subject matter experts to evaluate the functionality in their respective area, whether it's events management or membership or education, what have you. And then just as importantly, I would also figure out a handful of key members. You might segment your membership by by type. You might have organizational and individual members, et cetera. But the ones you know that are more actively engaged with the association, include them for all the member-facing bits. And then I guess I continue on here with requirements. So let's go to step 2. So, and this is incredibly important. Remember what I said earlier about you don't know what you don't know. So don't focus on the how, focus on why. What is the outcome you're looking to achieve? Don't worry about exactly how it's done today. I've gotten into more trouble with organizations confusing the means with the ends. And that's often not the case. Remember, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what's possible out there. And hint, that's the way we've always done it, is not an outcome. So outcomes focus on results that move the needle rather than replicating what you do today. So let me tell you a story about a client I had one time that actually they're telling me about how they do event registration for their organizational members. And they had discounts so that each membership was fixed price for one person. It was less than that for 5, even less for 10, and so on. And the way they handled that, believe it or not, was everybody registered and paid their full fee. And then when they got to 5, the association credited back the delta for the 5 discount to each of the 5 who have already registered. And again, when they reach 10, et cetera. That is why you focus on outcomes, not on process. That's a process that was screaming for fixing. Vanessa?
Yeah, and I will also add the answer of this is how we've always done it. I used to have someone always remind people that's an answer of how long and not an answer of what you need. So that's just something to keep in mind. So Dave is talking about, how to write your requirements, making sure you're focusing on outcomes. I would recommend that once you have those written down, make sure you prioritize them. If you've done the job right, most of what you have in your requirements or should be must to have or, very important. So, if you come out with a whole lot of, must haves, that's probably okay. But make sure that you're clear on what the nice to haves are or what the things are that you maybe are a reach or a future goal, and share that with your vendors, because the vendors will, that will better help them understand if their product fits your must haves, or if you have some nice to haves in there that maybe are a reach, if that's also phase 2 for you, maybe it's on their roadmap, they might still say, oh yeah, we might still be able to serve your needs. Whereas if you had everything as a top priority, they might bow out and say, no, I don't think we can help you. And you might miss out on a good product there. And then when you're prioritizing, make sure you weight your scoring based on those priorities too.
And let me just add to that, Vanessa, real quick. When you weight your scoring, you might be inclined to just mark them as must-haves and very nice-to-haves. I recommend you dive down within the nice-to-haves and create priorities within that, so that you have really, it's not required, but really, really want this, to very nice to have, to plain nice to have, and anything below that is probably not going to be paid attention to. So just stick that in your back pocket for when you're defining your nice to haves. Go ahead, Vanessa.
So another one of our questions for you, we talked earlier about engaging stakeholders. Tell us about a success or failure you've had with engaging or failing to engage the right stakeholders with a project in the past. Usually people have a bit of a horror story about this, or a success story where they've successfully brought everyone into the fold and went live with good buy-in.
Well, and while we're waiting on these, I can tell you a story about a client I talked to yesterday that had just implemented a new system and was disembarking from that new system because once they got into it, they discovered it wasn't what the salespeople told them. And that is a horrible time to discover it's the wrong system. So the more homework you do up front, the better off you're going to be. and get into the details. This is not, something that you just take the words that they tell you. Get proof, get evidence that it does all the sticky wickets that you're looking for and can handle it the way you need it handled.
Yeah, we'll definitely be talking about that with the demos. I see some chats coming in.
Yep. Let's see what we have here. From the vendors, David, let's see, from the vendor side, client says they've already collected all the requirements. Dave, what am I missing in that? At 501c3, at a 501c3, we engaged the board to a degree that caused issues. They weren't the end users and didn't understand the operations or ended up using the system that looked nice but didn't work well for the staff. So that's really, when we ask you to engage board members or executives, make sure you engage them in the areas that are of interest to them, not in everything. They don't need to be engaged in what the frontline staff subject matter experts are telling you that they need at the front line. That will be a recipe for disaster, and I apologize for not clarifying that earlier. But engage them for the bits that the board will see, and if you don't have any bits that the board will see, show them the member-facing side. That's the important stuff, so that they know what it looks like to the membership, because remember, your board members are your members.
Well, I think you can also treat your board, if you have your executive committee involved, you could also treat them more like an executive sponsor. And you sort of have maybe monthly updates to them about the process and where you're headed. Give them assurance that you've been thorough in your look, but you don't necessarily need to involve them as decision makers in the whole process.
And then we have Rahul saying there have been times where all staff were not included in key trials. And again, that can be segmented based on the functionality that trial is focused on. Bring in the subject matter experts for that. You don't bring in everybody for that. Bring in the ones who that affects.
That's also where defining those roles ahead of time can come into play. I will sometimes do a RACI matrix with my groups before we start, so people know you've predefined this person is responsible, this person is accountable, this person should be consulted, this person should be informed about different stages of the process. So when it's time for testing, you know exactly who you're bringing in, who's responsible and accountable, exactly who you're reporting out to or asking questions from for that consulted and informed. And defining that ahead of time can, help create buy-in and help keep people from getting too fierce about whether they should be included or not. All right, I think we probably need to move on here. So step 3 is about finding vendors. One thing that we see a lot is organizations, I mean, you've probably seen them jump out on Collaborate and say, hey, we're a small organization, we're looking for an AMS. Anyone have any recommendations? Or do you know of AMSs that you like? And it's not even AMSs, sometimes they do that with other software too. And those, or you may have sister organizations in your industry that you talk to. So we just recommend, make sure you're using those peer recommendations in the right way. You often are more unique than you think. And I had a selection that we had 3 organizations that were sister organizations in the same industry, worked very closely together. One even did the marketing for another organization. So we all agreed, we thought, yeah, this will be great. We'll do a joint selection. You guys are probably all going to have the same needs and need the same system. It'll be great. We got 3 requirements, and when we got to the proposals, all 3 organizations were interested in different vendors because we found their requirements were actually quite unique. Even when they are very closely aligned and share a lot of the same functionality. So use peer reviews to find some recommendations, but also make sure that you're paying attention to your own needs. You're finding your own list of vendors that meet what you need and not just relying on what other people like to give you your list of vendors. And then use those peers for references. Once you narrow down your own list, it is appropriate to get in touch with those people and say, okay, tell me about your actual experience with that vendor, if that vendor is still on your list.
Yeah, and I would just like to add to that, what we see all the time, it drives Vanessa and I crazy, that out on Collaborate is people saying, hey, who would recommend their AMS? And you know they're just starting the process, and that you're just going to waste so much time going down so many rabbit holes of looking at systems that other people like because it works for them, but they won't work for you. So first, figure out your requirements, figure out the systems that can handle those requirements, then go get your peer reviews on Collaborate. That's fine. Or Review My AMS or whatever other sources that you have out there. Right size your vendors. And this goes back to that comment I talked about earlier about AMS Fest and not knowing who's 200,000, who's $10,000. You want, on the one hand, you want a system you can afford, but on the other hand, the AMS is the future of your business. If you haven't gotten the memo yet, COVID kind of changed everything. Our in-person relationships that we had before and built our associations on in the past, they're still there, but they don't scale the way your online digital engagement platform can scale with you. The old model for how much you should spend was 4% of revenue, but those systems were focused exclusively on streamlining operations. And folks, today, streamlining operations is table stakes. The new model is built on an awareness that this will be the platform on which you engage with the majority of your stakeholders, whether it's the portal, continuing education, or the online community. You have to ask yourself, do you want to be that brick and mortar store, or do you want to be more like Amazon in engaging with your members? So the new model I recommend is 6 to 8%, and it could go higher. Ironically, smaller associations have to spend a greater percentage on technology because they don't have as much money and there are certain fixed costs on the floor of what the technology is going to cost you. So a smaller association, if you're under 2 million, you might want to be looking at 8 to 10% as opposed to 6 to 8%. So anyways, if I hadn't made it clear before, this whole computer fad isn't passing anytime soon. It's important to understand that you're selecting a platform that will become the primary means of how your members and prospects engage with you. New systems are geared for value creation, either in the form of greater member engagement or identifying opportunities and deploying new revenue streams. In other words, no, I already said that, sorry. Know how the vendors want to work with you. Not so the vendors at the lower end of the spectrum, the less expensive end, don't go through the trouble of putting together a huge RFP because they're not going to respond to that. Their cost of sale is just too small. You are counter shopping when you're shopping for an out-of-the-box solution that's going to cost you under $50,000 to purchase. You only need to do a full-blown requirements gathering or needs assessment if you're going to be building that out on an enterprise platform, in which case it's going to be necessary for you to conduct that effort. Any comments on that before I move on to demos?
I just want to jump in about right sizing the vendors. Like Dave mentioned, you leave AMS Fest or a vendor demo set and say, I don't even know if the thing I just saw is right for me. How do you figure that out? Well, for one thing, if you get in touch with the sales team and talk to them about we're this big and we have this, amount, a lot of them will size by your gross revenue for the year or your number of staff, and talk to the sales team and say, this is how big we are, and we are wondering if we fit your target market. And if you're just aware that they know and they have a target market and can ask them about that, usually they'll be honest with you and say, well, you might be smaller than most of our orgs. Or if they don't really want to answer that question, you can say, tell me 3 other organizations that are my size that I can talk to who are your clients. And if they struggle to come up with a few that are really your size and do some research on how big those groups are, then you're probably looking at something that's either too big or too small. The other way to size it is have an idea of your implementation budget, your licensing budget, and talk to them ahead of time and pre-screen saying, this is kind of the budget that we're looking for. Can you fit within that? And most of the time, if your budget is way out of whack for them, they'll let you know because they don't want to over or undersell you. So just talk to the vendors and ask them outright, do we fit your market?
And if we have time at the end, I'll bring up a graphic that shows you what the vendor landscape looks like and allows you to see what vendors fall in which place, and you can grab a screenshot at that time. So demonstrate demos, and this is critical. Demos are everything.
Well, we have
did I leave something out?
question here.
Sorry.
So how have you guys gone about qualifying your vendors, especially the ones of you who actually are implementing or recently selected? How did you go about, maybe you can help your peers, figuring out which vendors would be in your list to talk to in the first place? Hint, Beacon knows one way. You could certainly use Beacon to find your right vendors. It's an online survey tool that gathers your requirements so that we suggest the vendors that actually fit your needs. That's one way. How did other people do it?
Let's see. One is using a consultant.
Mm-hmm.
Several still need to do that step. Let's see. References is one. Oh, and references, just let me say a key point on references. You're going to get references from the vendor. Those are going to be the ones that they always throw at their clients because God knows they love their vendor, and that's what you're going to hear. More importantly, as Vanessa mentioned earlier, is to go the backdoor route. And by that, I mean out on Collaborate, people that are using the systems. Talk to those people. Talk to the ones that you can definitely talk to the ones the vendors give you, but it is critically important that you talk to references that the vendors did not give you and get the real story.
Even if you talk to the ones the vendors give you, ask some hard questions and be critical, like what did they do wrong and how could it have been better, and what would you have changed? How would you have worked with them better? And I've had clients get all, make their selection, they've made their final choice, they start calling references and they've changed their final choice because the references that the vendors gave them were not stellar. And if they're not stellar and the vendors provided them, that's a red flag.
And
So what do we see about people?
I'm
How are
sorry.
people qualifying the vendors? We saw consultants, we saw still need to do that step. References, we talked about that.
Not at that stage.
Not at that stage. Okay.
When you do talk to the references, please, and you're going to hear that throughout this call, script everything. Script your reference calls so that you're getting an apples to apples comparison of vendors and apples to apples comparison based on who called the reference. If everybody's asking different questions, you're going to have a hodgepodge that you're not going to be able to understand when it's all done or get any clear messages from.
That's a good point. So now we're going to talk about the demo stage, super important. And that script point is a good place to start.
So, like I said, script everything. The demo is the most critical thing to script. You do not want vendors coming in and telling you how wonderful they are and how great they are and randomly showing you pieces of their application or even randomly asking them to show us how does a new member join? How do they renew? How do they register for an event? And that sort of thing. Script the vendors around the most critical issues that you face today with your current system. Remember, what's driving you to this process is the things that your current system can't handle. So I would emphasize, don't focus on the bread and butter table stake stuff like membership joins and renews. Focus on those critical problems. But again, keep that lens on that we're looking at outcomes, not process. And create a script, and you might even script things that the vendor can't do. So I always put a little disclaimer at the end saying that if your system isn't capable of doing these, please show us how you would recommend accomplishing this task using your system, or the best way to use your system to accomplish this task, and let them come up with the solution. You might be surprised. So basically, yeah, go ahead, Vanessa.
I was just saying, I like the hint here too. We definitely recommend that you use a survey to collect feedback from your staff during the demos. And you can always say if the vendor starts straying from the script and trying to show their cool new shiny, you can say, hey, this isn't on my survey. I think we need to get back to the script.
Right, right. And don't let them jump off script or allow your audience to take them off script even. You can always handle that after the script is dealt with. Make sure everybody gets through the script, and then they can have time for Q&A and time to show off whatever it is they think will show them in a better light relative to the competition. But steer that to the end when they try and go in that direction.
Yeah, you definitely need a strong facilitator to table questions for later, or we'll come back to another demo time, or yeah.
Yeah. All right, Vanessa, yours.
So I would also suggest that you, and going back to that point about tabling it for later, if someone starts asking about a complex process and you find the conversation the vendor is going to want to know and dig into, if they show you something and it's not sufficient, you say, well, that doesn't really work, and they're going to say why, and you're going to start getting into sort of a requirements gathering with them, and that's great. You want the vendor to do that, you want to go through that process, but you may need to, in that scripted demo where everyone wants to see their own stuff, you don't want to shortchange any departments, so you table that and then have that conversation with the vendor, go into those deep requirements, explain your complex processes, maybe even show the vendor in your current system how you do it, or artifacts that you use in that process, so that they really understand it. Ask them to create a proof of concept in their system for those harder to accomplish things, or things that they showed you in the demo and didn't quite work. Say, okay, go back and try it again. Here's more information, and see how close they can get. But ask to see it. Don't take their word. Oh yeah, of course you can do that. Of course you can do that. Actually, the proof is in the pudding. And you can also ask them, how can their system improve that current process when you're getting into those complex needs?
Okay. And I recommend that you actually have 2 rounds of demos. The first round is for everybody that on the surface is capable of meeting the requirements that you spelled out based on the proposals that they've provided, or the responses to the RFQ or RFI. And that should be everybody, 4 or 5 vendors. More than that kind of gets shaky. And then at the end of that process, and remember, you're going to be doing these surveys, these team surveys in real time while the demo is happening. So you'll be able to score those afterwards, and you will all know by the end of the first round of demos who your top 2 are. You will probably, or often cases, people will find the top vendor that they just all really love. But I strongly encourage you to go to the finalist round with at least 2 vendors, but no more than 3, because you can't negotiate when you have only 1 vendor, and you need a little room for negotiation. So evaluate the proposals first, then select who's going to be in the first round of demos. Then when you get through that process, you can go through the scores. You're going to know who your 2 finalists are. When you evaluate the vendors, evaluate the whole package. Don't take it just on the demo, or just on the proposal, or just on your experience of talking with them. Score the proposals. I know you're getting sick of us hearing about scoring everything, but it's that fuzzy area between here's our quantitative results of what everybody said versus, but we kind of like these guys because, well, the salesperson was really nice or whatever, and you start going astray of what's going to put you on the proper path to get the right solution. So consider the total proposal, the product, the vendor, not just the price, and create a cost comparison, and do that 3 years out. So all the vendors are going to give you their implementation costs. And remember, that first year, every vendor is going to charge you both the implementation and the first year's run rate cost. So the first year is going to be the most expensive because you're paying both of those fees. Years 2 and 3, you're only going to pay the annual, whether it's licensing, support, what have you, but chart those out in a table so you can see what the true costs are combined over and amortized over, say, a 3 or 5 year period to see how much they really rank up on the cost side. And then if the implementation cost is too high, it's possible you can ask some of these vendors if they could possibly stretch that out over the first 2 years. If that's a problem, if you really love the vendor and you want them, but the implementation's too high, negotiate with them. Vanessa?
Yeah, and I would suggest doing the cost comparison out a few years because it tends to help you even out between vendors where they may have, one vendor may have a higher implementation cost, but a lower licensing cost. One may have a higher licensing cost and a lower implementation cost. And over a 3 or 5 year period, you can see what does the total investment look like, and are those actually equivalent, or sometimes the one that you think is going to be cheaper in the long run, when you run it out 5 years, ends up being more expensive. So that 3 to 5 year comparison is way more helpful than just the 1 year. And I would, going back to the feedback, Dave's right, we're going to tell you to get feedback at each stage. And I would suggest that you do that in different ways. So you want the quantitative scoring, but also get qualitative feedback. And I usually do this by facilitating a discussion around the proposals and then a discussion after the demos, maybe even another discussion after the second round of demos. Where you gather let your decision makers, your core team, maybe even your SMEs sit around a table and talk about their impressions of each vendor in turn. I usually ask them to come prepped with their top 1 to 2 pros and cons for each vendor, and then do a round robin, make sure everybody has a chance to talk about the vendors for their pros and cons, and just hear from each other what the impressions are. Now, that can create some groupthink. So you also need that quantitative surveys and scorecards that each person does individually. And then most important, make sure that you gather that information from people in different kinds of channels. Not everybody is comfortable putting all of their opinions out in a meeting verbally. Some people might want more processing time. Some people want to do it written. Some people may want to give their stuff more anonymously. Some people may want to, may be swayed by their peers more, but if you get them out of a meeting setting, maybe in a one-on-one discussion, you might hear their actual opinion. So know your staff and think about all these different ways that people communicate when they're in their comfort zone. And that's when you're going to get their actual opinion. So give multiple ways for people to give feedback.
And back on the survey part of it, when you are surveying everything, the demos, the people's review of the proposals, etc., a couple of quick tips. One is always include both the quantitative and the qualitative option answer space for each task in the script or each thing review point that they're writing about the proposal, because and use a 6-point scale for the quantitative part, because that forces them to one side or the other of the median. If you use a 5-point scale, 4 out of 5 times they're going to mark everything a 3. You want to push them to, is it really higher or lower? So use a 6-point scale. The other thing is try and get them to fill that out in real time, because at the end of a day of demos or at the end of a couple of days, it all mushes together and you're not going to remember who showed what when, and the surveys then become fairly pointless. So
That is
right.
really important. And I handle that by telling people the survey will be open till the end of the day and then it's going to be closed. So either if you want to have your voice heard at all, it's got to be that day that you see that demo.
All right. Do you think we have time to bring up my favorite slide?
Well, this is
the question we got to do first.
Yeah, you were going to talk about why we're saying score everything. That's sort of overall.
I think I beat that horse to death, but script and score everything, because that's where all the problem situations that we come across, and believe me, Vanessa and I and every other tech consultant out there, they come to us oftentimes when they've tried it in-house first and it didn't succeed. And that's the main reason. They didn't have a clear, concise scoring of the process as they went through it. You need this to properly guide your efforts. What I was going to say, when you do the surveys, you got that quantitative score on a 1 to 6 scale, and then underneath it have a notes section so that they can write whatever it is they really liked or didn't like about the particular aspect that they just gave a rating to. Don't just stick to the numbers. Make sure you get some of that softer stuff as well. So,
if you have the slide up and you want to share.
I do. Let me do that. Let me,
and then we'll come back and close out. I'm sure there are questions as well. If there are burning questions that we want to answer in the chat, Chris, I know you've been sort of monitoring chat. Are there any questions we should be surfacing?
Yeah, I'll keep a lookout. I just made a call out for questions as well. So we'll see what comes through.
Right. So you've all seen Gartner's Magic Quadrants. Well, this is Dave's Magic Quadrant. And the x-axis on the bottom of this chart, this is going to be the overlay of all the AMS vendors out there. The x-axis is how modern is the technology stack from prehistoric to modern day. And let me turn on my little laser pointer quick here. So, and by prehistoric, we're really looking at 15, 20 years old. 15 to 20 years ago, we didn't have CRM as a concept, really. We didn't have social media. We didn't have a lot of stuff. So that's primordial ooze in the evolution of the tech stack for the modern association. The y-axis is how customizable, how extensible is it? And I saw several chats in the several texts in the chat about how hard it is to find a monolithic solution. Should we go best of breed sort of question? And best of breed is great, but if you're a small association having multiple tech stacks to wrestle with and not having a single source of truth that you can go to and get all the answers you need about a given stakeholder, it might create more problems than it's worth. So I would advise you to try and look, especially for smaller associations, and find a solution that's going to handle the biggest number of your requirements up front. So these are all the vendors up here. And Vanessa and I have spent the last 15, 20 years up in this quadrant up here, because these systems, everything above this middle line basically costs $100K or more to implement. So small associations aren't going to be shopping here. These are enterprise solutions that have to be built out to your strenuous evaluation of your strict requirements. So it's very important to do a complete needs assessment when you're looking up here. This bottom section here and the stuff on the sweet spot for smaller associations, these are all the vendors that we have in Beacon Tech Research engine that you can look up and get aligned with your values. But understand that up here you are building out on an enterprise platform. So it takes a lot more effort, which is why the implementations cost 100, 200, 300,000 or more to get there. And these down here are products. These have an out-of-the-box experience where you are counter shopping for the one that has the greatest overlap to your internal requirements analysis, because you're going to get what you get. They can all be customized a little bit, user configurations. You can always add demographic fields, but only to a certain extent. So make sure you're going to be happy with it before you commit, because you're not going to get more than that without going outside the box to another product. So feel free to take a snapshot of this, and hopefully this will guide you. All right, Vanessa, I'll stop sharing here.
Sure, I'll go back.
I'll stop sharing as soon as I can find the Zoom buttons.
Are we back to the regular presentation there?
Hey, Dave, question on the slide you just showed with all those logos. As far as new AMS systems entering the market, where do you see them tending to fall in that spectrum?
Well, it's all over the place.
Okay.
There's some new players around, like up here. Am I still sharing this?
We can go back.
Here, oh, let me share it
Yes.
again. Hold on. Are we
Yep,
there?
there you go.
Okay.
Yep.
So, for example, up here, now these are two NetSuite vendors, but they're brand new and they're in the enterprise market. There are more and more new vendors showing up down in this section of the slide market because product vendors are starting to learn that they are product vendors and really don't want all the support dollars. They want to be able to scale and grow their organizations and get bigger. So I am seeing more and more, but with that said, each one of these is getting more and more robust in the features and functions that they're providing. Some of these down here have abstract submissions and reviews capabilities. Many of them have online communities baked in. Many of them have broadcast emails. Some of them even have full-blown marketing automation baked in. Some of them have awards management and speaker showcases and on and on. So don't make assumptions based on the price that you're not going to get what you want. And if you can find it in the product end of the spectrum, it's going to be it's going to be a lot less expensive and relatively easier to maintain because you're not going to have a one-off system. You're going to have a product. All right, I'll
One thing
stop
I will
there.
also add about the smaller products out there is that the modules that you need are often what you use to limit the vendors that you're looking at, because not all of them are going to have all the modules. Whereas in that higher end, you're going to have systems where they pretty much do have all the modules that you could need. So that's one of the reasons, making sure you know exactly what you need and qualifying the vendors based on that can really eliminate some of those. There are way more product level, smaller AMSs out there than there are the big guys that can serve enterprise organizations. But that's because they don't all do everything. And so filtering them out can seem a little more scary, but they don't all have all the modules. So if you know what you need,
Yeah.
you should be able to filter them out.
And David, what was the criteria that you used to establish those different areas within that graphic? Someone's asking, how is it put together? Is it based on qualitative or quantitative information?
It's based on qualitative. So the pricing was represented on the vertical axis. And the modernity, or how long it's been around for, was represented on the x-axis.
Right.
And just be careful. All of these vendors, they start out falling in love with the problem and solving it, and that's how they built their system in the first place. But as the years go by, they stop falling in love with solving the problem and fall in love with their particular solution. And some of them will move forward and enhance and evaluate, but some of them are going to say, no, this is the way to solve your problem, and stick with the tech stack they've got.
Okay. And then someone was asking Virginia to explain sort of when you say build out, what you mean by that exactly.
So build out is really that I was grappling for a term, because the bottom end is products, and it's basically, an out of the box experience. Everything above that bottom third of the system, really, they'll tell you they do, but they don't really have an out of the box experience. Their out of the box experience is whatever it is they did for their most recent client. And then they cookie cutter that onto the next one and expand it, or they start with some foundation, but it's more like the steel girders in a building and the poured concrete with none of the walls or the windows or any of the details baked in. So they have to go through a lot of that. The build out, the top third, they will build whatever you want because they are on a true enterprise platform, whether it be Salesforce or Microsoft CRM or NetSuite or their own proprietary platform. They will build it out to whatever it is you need, or until your last dollar, which is usually the thing that comes first. So that's the top third. The middle third, they can build out, but they can't extend it to whatever you want. They can't build an inventory management system. They can't build a speaker
Mhm.
showcase if they don't have that baked in. So they're kind of betwixt and between. And again, that bottom third again is an out of the box product based experience. I hope that clears it up.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on to the sort of wrap up here so that we stay in our time. So bottom line, you can do this. I know it seems really, daunting and scary. If it is, then get help. Certainly, you don't have to go it alone. But you can use these tips to make sure that you're moving in the right direction and being smart and intentional about each stage. One bonus tip, if you come to the end of the process, we see this a lot, and you have two great options and people are really struggling to make a decision, that's actually good news because it means you have two great options on your hands and you probably aren't going to go too wrong with choosing either. I have even had clients that literally flipped a coin by the end of it. Um,
Well, that's true.
so it's okay if that happens.
Absolutely. And use it to negotiate
Yeah,
to your advantage.
exactly. That's also a good point. So I don't know if there are any final questions here. Um, any final tips that we want to throw out or that you want to ask about?
Just again. Oh, one other tip I'll throw out there when it comes to user acceptance testing. So all the vendors, even the lower end ones, are going to do some configuration and customization to meet your specific join process or renew what have you. And you're going to have your people test it. Don't have one person test everything and then give it out to everybody. Have the frontline people in each function test it, because it's not only how they test it and ensure that it meets their needs, but it's also how they learn how to use the software. So this should be an all hands on process. And I'll
Yeah,
end with that.
and the testing is something that I find vendors do not provide a lot of support for testing. You're gonna need to make sure that you're ready to create some test scripts. Again, scripting, there's that word, where you're actually laying out like, here are our processes, and you can use your requirements based, to drive this, your original requirements. Look at those and say, okay, if this was the requirement, here's what we need to test to make sure that we can still do this in the new system and everyone understands how. But you'll have to make a plan for what you're going to test and how, and make a plan for how to collect that feedback and feed that back to the vendors. Make a plan for how to
And
address when they come back to you. That whole process is not usually supported much by the vendor. They'll
yeah,
turn it over to you, they'll train you, and then they say, you test, but
Mhm.
you are gonna have to come up with a plan for that or
and
work with a consultant.
and again, more than one person testing any given
Of course.
because one set of eyes and hands on a test is about as good as the internal testing that the software company does. The more, the merrier.
Yeah.
And I think we're at time.
Yeah,
Are
I
we?
think we'll toss it back to Nicole to finish up.
Great, thank